Hello, I'm Laurence Lehmann-Ortega. I'm a professor of strategy at HEC, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this session about regenerative organizations. So regeneration has become a kind of buzzword, no? We've seen many different sessions on the topic here at ChangeNOW, and I think that's really a new way for companies to think beyond sustainability, maybe, or to think maybe this is, the new sustainability 3.0 or something. Actually, companies realize more and more, especially in Europe, that they need to go just beyond doing no harm, that they need to be maybe positive, that they need to regenerate. But what does this actually mean? We've heard about this maybe in agriculture. We understand what regenerative agriculture is. But what about regeneration in organization? Or in businesses? What does this actually mean? Well, this is exactly what this session this afternoon is about. And we'll talk about what regeneration is, how can a company become more regenerative? Is there something like a regenerative organization already? Do we have examples? So this is the purpose of our topic, of our session this afternoon, and I'm really delighted to welcome here on stage with me our panelists for this afternoon. So, welcome my guests on this panel. So I'm really happy to have you with us this afternoon. So I'd like to start with you, Christophe, to introduce you. So you're the founder and CEO of Lumia, which is a action research center and a training center about regeneration. Antoine Denoix, you are the CEO of HEC Climat. We have also with us Eric Duverger. You are the founder of this Convention des Entreprises pour le Climat, which is the convention of companies for climate. You have founded this convention. And Sarah Dubreil, who works for the Club of Rome and who also has been an entrepreneur for Suez in climate tech business for the past 10 years. So welcome all of you, and maybe what we'll do this afternoon is to have 3 parts during this panel. First, to talk about what regeneration actually is and to understand what the concept is about. Second, to see how a company can actually become regenerative. And then maybe we can talk about the challenges of doing so, because I guess there are many, many challenges in becoming a regenerative organization. So maybe we can start with you, Christophe. You are the CEO of Lumia. You have created Lumia. You do action research on regeneration in companies. You're an academic on the topic. You are a specialist of this topic. So thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. And maybe you can take us through the definition of what regeneration is and what regenerative organizations are.
Thank you very much, Laurence. If we want to understand what regeneration is, we first have to think about the planetary boundaries. I guess that most of you are familiar with the planetary boundaries, those processes that contribute to the equilibrium of the Earth system, and 6 of the 8 planetary boundaries that have been measured are already crossed. So what does it mean? That means that we cannot afford anymore to reduce our negative impact. We have now to repair, to restore, to regenerate our ecosystem. And we need to make this connection with planetary boundaries to properly understand what regeneration is. So most of the time we introduce regeneration as the ability to generate net positive impacts on ecosystems, on society. If I want to be a little bit more accurate, I would say that regeneration is the ability to create the condition that will allow life to express its full potential. So regeneration is a unique property of living entities. If I take a glass and if I break this glass would never repair by itself. And if we repair it, it will remain, we will see the trace of the fall. But if I cut myself, I will benefit from an automatic and an intrinsic process of cell regeneration. And this is a key message. My first key message is regeneration is a unique property of living systems. So practically, if we want to engage a company in the way of becoming regenerative, we need to go into two movements. The first one is the reduction of negative impact at the incompressible threshold. And we will need to that, most of all, to innovate on business model. But I think that we will talk about that later. And the second movement is the ability to generate those positive impact. And the only way to do this is to reconnect the activity with nature. So it's quite easy to understand and quite easy to imagine the path when we are a company that is by nature connected to nature. If I'm a farm, if I'm a forestry management company, it's quite obvious to see that to become regenerative, I will have to adapt, to transform my production system, but also probably the other dimension of my business model. But if I'm not connected with nature, probably I won't be able to be regenerative on my own. I will have to cooperate with other actors, some of them being connected with nature, so that at the level of an ecosystem of actors, we could try to become regenerative, or at least to evolve collectively to become regenerative. We will have to reconnect with nature. There are many entry points to do that. For example, the sourcing. The supply chain is a way, the ability to renature our infrastructure, our equipment, the ability to reconnect some production process with biology. These are some examples of paths that allow a company, whatever its activity, to become or to evolve toward regeneration.
Okay, so that's probably why we're more familiar with regeneration in agriculture. It seems more obvious than in any other sector, basically, that is not so connected to the living. So maybe, Sarah, you've just finished a report written for BPI about regenerative companies. So maybe you want to elaborate on what Christophe has just said about regenerative, what a regenerative organization actually is.
Thank you very much. First, I would just like to thank Valérie Brunel, just here, with whom I worked on this report for the past month. So I think what Christophe said about regeneration, which is very important for me, is like recreated the condition of life to regenerating itself. So really regeneration, we've been using nature for the past decades, and regeneration is about partnering with nature and really doing as much as we can as nature. So what we are talking about is not another technical sector. We are really into system change. And an example of a framework which we often talk about in regeneration is the permaculture framework, which is a good example of how to create conditions that allow for regeneration. So permaculture is about caring for people, caring for earth, and sharing fairly. If I give an example, I really like, for example, Waisatio, which is one of the main landlords in Finland, and who is very active currently and trying to do their work regeneratively. So they have something called biodiversity building. So caring for Earth, they are working on how to have buildings that are built without harming nature, being included in the landscape, using bio-based products that can be after biodegradable. They are working on how to use these buildings to host also biodiversity inside it, including gardens inside the building itself. It's also about caring for people. So these buildings, they've been rethinking how you optimize how you care for the relationship, for intimacy, for the people living inside it. How do you create commons? They are also well known to have worked about ending homelessness in Finland, and finally sharing fairly. So Waisatio is also a not-for-profit, so it's not only one of the main builder and owner housing and renter of housing in Finland, all their profits is reinvesting for their mission, centered on the mission.
Okay. So thank you for sharing this very good example about what a regenerative company can look like. But maybe we can go now to the second part, now that we understand what a regenerative organization is. Maybe how do we become a regenerative organization? And maybe I want to start with you, Antoine. So you founded HEC Climate, and you help your clients actually fight against climate change, let's put it this way. So what do you think it takes for a company to become regenerative? How can you transform it? How do you become a regenerative company?
So not an easy question. First, a humility declaration. HEC Climate is not a regenerative company. I'm not an expert of regenerative. What can I share with you? Maybe it's just a story of HEC Climate going for regenerative. Our mission at HEC Climate is mainly to train. And we have been able to train successfully millions of employees outside AXA for biodiversity, natural resources, sustainable transition for big corporates. But we went through, it was 2 years ago, 2 wake-ups, as I call them. The first one is a science wake-up. This is the one mentioned by Christophe. Beyond carbon, you have 8 or 9 planetary boundaries. And the bad news and the shock of complexity, as I call it, is the fact that it's dynamic. And the wake-up, the science wake-up, to give you a concrete example, is this idea that corporates can be successful in decarbonization, destroying at the same time biodiversity. So the first wake-up is a science one. And the second one is a business one. The business wake-up, as I call it, is this idea, very simple one, that you understand that most of our corporates are driven by a unique business model rules, which is always more. The volumic setup with concrete manifestation in our day-to-day. When you see the washing machine, for example, it's very funny and quite surprising to understand that the duration of our washing machine at home has been able to decrease over the past 7 years of 30%. We are more and more expert in materials, and we have been able, through our existing business models, to trigger these absurdities in our day-to-day, absurdities in connection with the science wake-up.
And you had a session about this the other day,
exactly.
Right?
So based on this wake-up, for us it was very important not only to put additionality in sustainability, but what I call in France, rentrer dans le dur, to get serious about business model. That's why we connected with Christophe and some other ecosystem players for regenerative, in order to change a paradigm and to be able to operate a change of pair of glasses. We have studied many corporates on the way, on the regenerative path, and the common denominator of these leaders is for me the following. They do not consider mechanically their companies. They adopt what I call a living pair of glasses. I mean that they consider their corporates, their companies, as living systems. So they are inspired by nature, by ecosystems, and they apply living principles in order progressively to change their business models, their culture, and their organizations. And for me, maybe a last element of maybe that can be helpful for those listening to you. It's difficult to define regeneration. We have hundreds of definitions, of course. For me, the good way to see if I am regenerative in my day-to-day is to say, do I create the conditions of surprises? For example, when you water a plant in a pot, sorry for my English, if you come back after days, after weeks, the plant will stay in the pot. It's doing good to the plant because it's good to water a plant. So it's good, it's doing good, and it's good. But we need going to regenerative to go beyond and to be able to say, okay, to do good and to be regenerative with a plant, we need not only to water the plant directly, but to understand well the singularity of the plant, the conditions of life for the plant, and to put the plant in an ecosystem that will enable the plant to surprise us, leveraging, being in a continuous creation mode with other plants, other territories, other ecosystems. So I think it's a good way for me. Regenerative for me means being surprised, in fact.
Okay, and so you also mentioned it's a lot about culture, changing the culture, changing a pair of glass. So maybe I would like to hear from you now, Eric, what you think, how can you become a regenerative organization, or how can you start a path towards regeneration? So you have created a Convention des Entreprises pour le Climat, again, so it's a convention for companies for climate. And you've have more than 200 companies in France following this program. And it was also born through a wake-up call that you had personally, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. I'm super happy to be here with you and with the other panelists here, who are a person I like very much. Well, first of all, what we have to say is that regeneration is absolutely essential. It's the only way to reverse, what we are doing to nature, and I think it's obvious here, but it's vital. Then the second part, because we've launched this with 150 companies, and now we have more than 500 trying to go on this path, on this journey, that it's very, very difficult. It is a step change, right? And so we have perhaps 3 epiphanies on this journey. The first one is it starts in yourself. So we have a program for CEOs and managing directors. It starts from the top of the company and starts, I would say, inside the head and the heart of these people. If they don't get it inside what it is, if they don't have this impulse to go there, they will not achieve it. It's too hard, They will, if they just realize with their brains, but they don't see that it's vital, they will stop after a few months. So it needs to be very deep inside. So it starts there. Then the second part is what we see with all the examples we have, is that you need to onboard your company. So obviously a CEO sometimes is very alone, And what we see is that if they have no way to embark all their, inside ecosystem, they will not succeed. They need to find allies in their board and allies everybody in the company to have a movement of joy of going there. That's the second part. And the third part, we are amplifying, it's to go through your ecosystem. And I think Antoine said it, and everybody said it. You cannot go regenerative by yourself. You cannot go there in a silo. You need friends, so other companies, but also public sector. And you need to go very local to make this happen. So these are the 3 keys that we have found.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Sarah, what is according to you the most important thing to transform and to become a regenerative organization?
Maybe first to explain where it comes from for me. So I've been working for the past 10 years in the environment sector. So working first on projects, believing in it, then working as a VC in technology, believing in technology, the what, then believing in measuring everything, launching a company on carbon measurement. And so I've been focusing on the why and the what for 10 years and reaching the limits of the system. And for me, the answer which is interesting in regeneration is the how, and the how and the with whom. And the how, it was expressed by you, Antoine, like the culture. It's not just doing agriculture differently. It's not just doing biomimicry, bio-based. It's a real change in how we see the world in some way, and how we create a company. And so the how is about culture. The how is also about how you embed in your everyday organization, in your processes, a different way of doing. And so it's about governance. I think it was one of the subjects that was advocated, for example, by the donut economics people here. I think it's very key because if we don't go to governance inside regeneration, we are stuck into a system which is currently extractive. And it's going to be very key to look at every level. So the governance of your company, how do you include, we talked about people care, earth care, fair shares. How do we include it in a shareholder pact? How do we include it in the way we structure our financial investors? If we don't change it, we will change the culture below, but then you will go back to former system. And it's not an easy question, and that's when you touch it, you touch all the question of well, how do you do investment and how we could do investment differently, regeneratively. There are first examples of ways of going toward regeneration. It's not being regenerative. Nobody knows currently what it would mean. I'm talking, for example, about steward ownership. So how you can center your company on commons having a foundation that will own your shares, for example, and centering it on nature. That's what Patagonia did a few months ago. And you have examples such as, for example, having nature on board. You have first companies in the UK that start to work on it. So we talk about partnering with nature. It's not about measuring everything. It's more about how do you include inside the governance, inside every processes, caring for nature. So for me, governance is one of the key parts of the regenerative organization.
So we talked about culture, ecosystems, governance, leadership, about what needs to be transformed and to enhance on the transformation journey towards regeneration. But what about the business model? And as you're a specialist of business model, Christophe, can you please tell us what it changes on the business model?
Yeah, for sure. We need indeed to transform our business model. Why? As I say, we need to engage simultaneously two stages, two steps. The first one is to reduce the negative impact at the incompressible threshold. What does it mean, incompressible threshold? Just to give you an idea of the level of intensity of this threshold, if we look only at the carbon, and with regeneration we have to have a systemic view of the reality, but from the carbon point of view, on average, if we want to remain on the trajectory of 1.5 degrees, we have to reduce on average from 42% the greenhouse gas emission from 2020 to 2030, and from 90% up to 2050. What does it mean? That means that the incompressible threshold is at 10% of current emission. Within current business model, at the maximum, we're able to address, I would say, 30% of greenhouse gas emission. Why? As Antoine has mentioned, the current business model are based on a volume-based approach. If you want to develop the company, you have to sell more units of something, and those units are always connected, related with raw materials and with energy. So we have to transform the business model to escape from this volume-based logic in order to generate income, to generate and to foster the development of the company on another basis. What do we have in hand? We have several alternatives. One is the service-based business model. It's possible not anymore to sell, for example, a product, an equipment, an infrastructure, but to make it available by invoicing its use. What does change? When you sell it, it's not in your interest to build it in a way that it will last longer. When you make it available and when you invoice the use, it's your interest to design a product that will last as long as possible. This is one change. But of course, this could be applied to some categories of business, not to all. Another option is to transform the business model, not to sell any more product or a service, but to make the result, the desired effect of the product, the services, available to the customer directly and to invoice this result. What does it mean? That means by doing so, you totally transform the dynamic of performance of the model, because the raw materials you're implementing to get this result is not anymore the lever of your income, but it's a cost that should be minimized. So it's a totally different approach. So you have plenty of business model to escape from this logic. If you want to engage into the second option, the second stage, which is the positive impact, the reconnection to nature, once again you will have to address the business model. I just give you one example. Just imagine you are a wine company, a wine producer. If you produce the wine locally by relying on regenerative agriculture, you may say, nice, I have a regenerative company, I have a regenerative business. But if you take those wine that is produced locally to send them all around the world, the benefits from an environmental point of view you were able to generate in the crops are totally destroyed by the organization of the supply chain. And so it's dead. So if you don't transform the business model to relocate the consumption where wine is produced, you are out of the scope of regeneration. And once again, it's a matter of business model. So we could discuss about a very long time, but I hope that you have some key points.
Sure.
Thank you, Christophe. It illustrates perfectly well the change of pair of glass. Imagine that you are the CEO of a chemicals input providers company. You sell chemicals to producers. You can see your chemicals either like revenues, either like a cost. Change of pair of glass. And it's a love declaration for Christophe and HEC, because HEC, you have a huge responsibility on this aspect. For me, part of the epiphany on regenerative came from this idea of having alternatives to our business models. We are so used to our volume-based business model that even personally, I completely forgotten that alternatives of business model were possible. So it's also a great source of creativity in the way we operate and earn our livings in our companies, to be able to open to alternatives. So it's a good example of a pair of glasses.
Can someone maybe give us an example of a company? So I know we don't really have perfect examples of a completely achieved regeneration in a company, but maybe you can give us examples of companies that are on the path of becoming regenerative?
We have some example of truly regenerative company. I give one case, but there are some. For example, Guayaki. Guayaki is a US company producing energy drink based on mate. Mate is a plant that grows in the Atlantic forest in the South America. And they have developed a reforestation-driven business model. Traditionally, the mate is grown at the shadow of the canopy of the Atlantic forest. Now it moves from the forest to traditional crops, sun-grow crops. It destroys mainly the quality of the product. So they have decided to reintroduce the crops of mate within the Atlantic forest. And for each mate plant which is cultivated, a tree is planted so that the local population could get a revenue from a tree alive and not anymore a tree that need to be cut to generate income for local population. So they have totally redesigned a business model where reforestation is not a nice to have, but it's totally embedded within their business model, and it's something that provide nutritional qualities to the product, which is valorized in the US markets. So it's something which is totally related to the business model, and where there is a co-evolution between the quality and the state of the forest and the quality and the state of the brand. And maybe, and this is the final word, this will differentiate regenerative business model from, for example, carbon compensation.
So it's really a real reconnection with nature, basically.
Absolutely,
that is
yes.
part of the business model itself.
Yeah.
Yes. Eric, you want
So perhaps quickly, but we have a French champion, or well, many French champions, but we have a company which is quite famous in France because Cyril Dion had a movie a few years ago. It's called Pocheco, so it's north of France, and they build envelopes. It's been a 15-year journey, and it's many different things they've done on, of course, the trees from which the envelopes are coming from, but also how they get the water in their place, how they get the chemicals, they have a forest around, how the people go to work, with which type of transportation do they have, car sharing on electric vehicles or a lot of biking. So it's like hundreds, literally, of actions that they've launched in 15 years to go to a place where they are carbon negative, so they give back, and they are autonomous for water, autonomous for energy. And what they do, as their supply chain is also positive for the forests in Scandinavia. So all in all, it's a lot of different things, but it is possible. And when you just look at a picture from, the earth to this company, it's very different because there are lots of trees there and the roof as well, and nature is everywhere in their company. So yes, it is possible.
Okay. But maybe I have a question then for you, and I'm not sure we can answer this question at this stage, but the examples you gave, it seems to me they're very local. So you mentioned Y Statio, right, as a Finnish company. You mentioned this a US company, or at least selling on the US market. You just mentioned Pusheco. It seems to me that those are very local companies, and it makes sense because, again, regeneration is about being local, being embedded in the nature. But can we imagine a bigger company that would be regenerative, or basically can you only have small companies that can be regenerative?
For us, our conviction is to make regenerative businesses universal. So if you think of regeneration like a change of paradigm, there is no exclusion. So all companies, all corporates should be able to trigger a regenerative step. Be it a full regenerative journey or a first step. The idea is to be able to take a step. And maybe I can talk about culture, because for me, if we talk about CAC 40 big corporates, it will be very difficult and it will take time to change a business model, unfortunately for some of them. But what can be done is to change the way people are organized and work together. It's what I mean by culture. And if I can testify, because we are AXA, we are at the middle of a big corporate at AXA Climate, I think always a change of pair of glass. If you start seeing employees like soil, you start seeing things differently as a leaders. The way you manage, the way you organize your teams. And it's always the same idea. Be it an employee or a soil, you need to apply living principles in order to create the condition of creativity and surprises. And if I give you maybe some example of how do we build a regenerative culture, because we are on our way at AXA Climate. For example, in terms of performance, you do not have any more individual performance. Because in a forest, as an ecosystem, you do not have in silo individual KPIs for the trees, the fungi, and other vegetables and other vegetals around. It's all the same bot, all the same targets, so only collective targets. And the increase of remuneration at AXA Climate reflects the skills development. So the question I ask you, Laurence, if you join AXA Climate, is at the end of the year, where did you grow yourself in terms of capabilities and intrinsic capabilities like Christophe mentioned? So the more you grow, the more we grow. And there is also this idea of autonomy. The idea is to break this kind of mechanistic way of doing work in our pyramidal organizations. We just, I would say, suppress the manager-managee relationship, this one-to-one relationship, and we replace it by rituals, collective rituals, in order to regulate the way, collectively, the way we operate. And the consequence of that is surprises. When I started AXA Climate 4 years back, I was an insurance company. Now I am a training company, in fact, in some way. And if I have kept as a leader this kind of predeterministic way, to say, okay, I want to build this strategy, to develop this tool, this product, starting with who I am, who I was at that time, no training at all. So always the same. I think the key element and the key first step for big corporates could be the culture, but because after, when you change the culture, you can plant many seeds of regenerative, and you can expect many butterfly effect and positive butterfly effect of employees inside or outside the company.
Perhaps on this question, Laurence, it is a great question because
it was not the answer to the question of Laurence. No,
no, but the other way around, because you give an answer on how it can happen, but the other way around is just to say that we have no choice. If big corporations don't make the move, our economy will not shift. You know, we talk in France, if CAC 40 company don't make that move to regeneration, we will be stuck. You know, we need in the forest small trees, we need mushrooms, you know, but we need the big trees also to make this move. And actually, it's something that we have in our strategic roadmap in the CEC. It's to work a lot with territories and 500 companies. But today we have no big companies that made this move to try to go regenerative. And so it's going to be a different journey for them. The cultural shift will be huge, but we need them to embrace this journey.
You want to add something, Sarah?
Even the states, public authorities, public institutions should go also on a regenerative path.
You want to add something, Sarah?
Yes, I just wanted to add, because you talked about the optimal size, and I think it's still a very huge question in the regenerative field, because one of the things of regeneration is really starting by a very concrete context, by a territory, by a community. And one thing that for me was very different, because I used to be in like a startup scheme where the objective is to grow, and even in the impact space, you create a solution, you deploy. And I think what's the difference is in regeneration, you're not doing good, you're just helping things to grow, helping people to grow. And it's a really different paradigm. It's much more humble. And then that's also why it's very contextual. You start from a territory, from a sector, and you're trying to help the different potentials to grow as much as they can. And we often talk about the question of size also, because regeneration is a question of going back to relationships, and once you get to abstraction, it gets very hard to maintain. You heard about permaculture. It's a kind of ethics. It's about value, embodied value. It's much easier when you are still at a level where you can talk about relationships. It gets a big question when you arrive at a level where you have just abstract figures.
Okay, so we can imagine that a company can be regenerative by design. Maybe it's easier when you start by design to become regenerative. What about companies that try to transform themselves to become regenerative? And I guess it's a huge transformation, as we understood from all your different points. So my question was more, and maybe it's for you, Eric, because you've seen so many companies starting their journey towards regeneration. Is it something that can be done step by step? I mean, the change is so huge, so radical, as we understood now. Can you actually do this step by step? Or does it need a revolution?
Well, I would say that doing step by step, little steps, is what we are trying to do somehow in the RSE sustainability world, and it doesn't work. So I would say the answer is no. You cannot just say step by step, we'll try to go on this. At the same time, so you need to give some radicality, some ambition for this step change, and to say this is where we project ourselves to do things very differently, potentially to do renunciations and some businesses that are not compatible with our future. So you need to be radical and very ambitious in where you want to go. That's the starting point. And then that's what we see, and I gave the example of Pocheco, but we see in any company. Then the change of culture will grow everywhere in your company. You as a leader, you cannot control what will happen, the great innovations and ideas of all your teams. It will flourish like that. And it will flourish day after day. So that you don't become regenerative by design as a starting company, but progressively you become a regenerative company. And then as a leader, you just step back and you look at it as growing, as a field or a forest by itself.
It's why it's frustrating when you pioneers regenerative, because sometimes you feel alone. Sometimes we feel alone because it's a change of paradigm. What we need to avoid is to apply mechanistic methodologies to regenerative. So when people tell me, okay, please define regenerative in 1 minute, Antoine, I do not do it. When people tell me how do we scale regenerative, I refuse to go that way. And I like very much what Sarah just mentioned. I think the key element of opposition to regeneration will come from uniformity. Each time we want to make it uniform, our methodologies, our definition, the way we want to operate, territories, and we are far from regenerative. And always a change pair of glass. In our day-to-day, I ask myself always the question now, in all action I take, do I do it for the sake of uniformity, or do I do it honoring the singularity of the employees, the territory, or the project itself? So uniformity is really what we should avoid, and regeneration will take time. Sorry for that. We do not have any one solution coming from the sky, and it will require change of awareness and pair of paradigm. I hope I'm clear about it, because I said it many times. Sorry for that.
So maybe there is still somehow an elephant in the room here, because we talked a lot about reconnection to nature, we talked about the change in business model and culture, in leadership, in governance. But what about profits? We didn't mention profit so far, or maybe Sarah, you mentioned that the company you gave as an example is a not-for-profit. So what is the link between profit and regeneration? Can a company be both regenerative and profitable, and what does it take?
Christophe, can I ask a question to Christophe? Because always corporates tell us, okay, Antoine, you are going to go regenerative, I'm going to lose money. But in fact, when they see all the lack of productivity coming from our traditional business model, at the beginning of them switching to regenerative, they make a lot of savings. For example, marketing. We invest a lot of GAFA, Google, etc., just to buy stuff. When you just try to make some, to have a regenerative intention, you start to optimize many issues of productivity in terms of management, advertising, marketing, and many other stuff. Maybe you can give some example.
Yeah. First of all, I would like to say that we will have to learn to limit ourselves. We have to learn to limit ourselves. This is a key element. When we change the business model, and when we transform the business model, for example, by relying on service-based business model, and well, it's properly done, because most of the attempts are not properly done, but when it's properly done, it's possible to multiply the profitability of the company by 3, by 4, by 10. I had coached some companies that have multiplied by 10 the profitability. But the right question is, what do I do with this value? Do I put it in my pocket to generate rebound effect? Or do I use this additional value to engage into regeneration? And of course, you know what we promote. So the ability to reorganize the way the profits circulate, the way we readdress the profit in order to support the investment, the huge investment we will need to transform our companies and to support projects that could regenerate natural ecosystem and human communities. This is probably the key question. And to do this, first we need governance. Second, we need inner resources, new level, improved level of conscience, and we need to implement totally new tools to redirect profits.
Yeah, I love your question. Laurence, there is an elephant in the room, and I think there is an elephant in ChangeNOW today, about profit. It's like many companies, I've worked in a company like that, say that we need to try to find the best balance between people, profit, and planet. You know, that's this triangle, people, profit, planet. And this is not true. When the people say that, it's not true. It's not, you know, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. It's 95% for profit, maximization of shareholder value, 3% for people. You need to have some people who feel well in the company so that they are performing. And 1 or 2% for the planet, because somehow there is more and more noise about it. That's the reality, especially in big corporations, and we have to know it. So here, what we say is that it's a new balance, of course, but we cannot put the yardstick of everything, profit and cash flow maximization. Sure. And redistribution of value in the ecosystem and some kind of generosity with the value that is created with this is really part of this shift of paradigm. That's why we're fighting here, because yes, profit is part of the equation. Money is fuel for any type of organization, but at the end of the day, the sharing needs to be very, very different.
And this comes back to the governance question, right, Sarah?
Exactly. Before we came, Antoine told me I'm the chaos factor, so I'm going to be the provocative one here. I think, like, indeed, we can earn some money with some measures. I mean, I worked before in circular economy. You've got many measures that help you to optimize. After, I'd say, let's not lie to ourselves. Like, win-win is nice, but there won't be win-win everywhere. I think regeneration, like, for years, we've had the shareholder value. Then we've had the shared value, so people, planet, profit. But I mean, if a planet goes away, especially if the living world goes away, we go away with him. Currently, I mean, all the past years I worked on nature-based solutions and biodiversity projects. There is no economic, especially in marine biodiversity, for example. So regeneration is about, like, first preserving. It's about global health of people, social health, and health of ecosystems. And this is first, health first, profit second. profit in favor of health. And so that's why we see an increasing number of not-for-profits in this sector. I think that's why the whole steward ownership way of doing is an interesting way of kind of curbing the current system. So you keep for-profit company, but then they are owned by a foundation that owns even more shares of the company.
So what Patagonia has done, basically.
Exactly, Patagonia. So that's a way. And it's just the beginning of a much bigger shift. I joined the Club of Rome for that. I mean, their key focus right now is rethinking finance, rethinking economics. So I think it's, but it's a start. And we are very lucky to have all you to do all this emergence.
And we have one recommendation for ChangeNOW, because we are all fans of ChangeNOW as an event. But the symbol of ChangeNOW is what we call soft sustainability. Huh? You have the 3 cycles crossing themselves. And I think your question relates to what we need to change in the logo. We need to go for hard sustainability, in fact, profit after planet. And I think it's not it's not at all the same symbol. Huh? I hope you get it, but your question is quietly linked about the fact that we are all moved to I would say mainly as a mainstream soft sustainability, and we need to go for hard one now, and it's urgent that we go for that in a fast way.
Okay, so I think it's time now to close this panel. So thank you very much. I think we've learned that regeneration will take a real different shift. It's a different pair of glasses. It's a change in business model. It's a change in governance and leadership. So it's a very challenging task, actually. And so I hope we'll all be in there for the years to come and go towards more regeneration. And so I would like to end this session. So first by thanking you for your participation in this session this afternoon about regeneration. I would like to thank all the attendees for this session. And maybe this is also the end of the session for HEC this afternoon. I hope you've enjoyed your afternoon. I hope that you've learned as much as I did this afternoon. I think it really nicely embodies what HEC tries to do. So our vision is to change, to impact the business and the society through our research, through our education, and through action. This is our Think, Teach, Act mission. And so I hope you have seen this with us this afternoon. We are trying to push the boundaries of knowledge, and we try to grow and learn all together. So I hope you enjoyed this afternoon, and thank you very much for being here. And we hope we will all go towards more regenerations in the years to come. Thank you very much for attending.